Let's see if things are working. All right. In theory, we are live on the internet. And hello to the few people watching. It seems like, Skall, you have garnered a larger crowd than is typical for me on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So
I'm sorry.
there are already 10 people here, which is kind of surprising. So hello, everyone. Skall has elected to join here, graciously accepted my invitation to come on. For those of you that don't know him, he's a big shot YouTuber. Skall, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me, Matt. Yeah, I'm just a weirdo with swords on YouTube. You know, I've been doing this since 2008, and you know, I review things. I don't usually destroy them quite the way you do, but it happens. And I make cringy jokes, from what I'm being told. Stuff like that, you know.
Yes, you must be a father with your level of dad jokes.
No, actually, I'm not, but somehow I channel that energy. I mean, I have a good friend who, well, two really, who do the same. In fact, they're way worse. One of them is also not a dad, and it's the kind of dad jokes that are intended to make you cringe, and he feasts on that. Like that, when people just groan. In fact, if he doesn't get the groan, he'll crank it up until he gets the groan. And then the other guy who is actually a dad, who actually makes good dad jokes. So there's something to it, apparently.
Yeah, it is irresistible at times. Your kids get to an age, and that age is when they start laughing, and then dad jokes immediately begin, where you're like, how can I kind of antagonize them in a way that will be endearing later? But in the moment, it's just like, yeah.
Well, it's been said that puns are the lowest form of comedy, so it's the low-hanging fruit, and the older you get, the more tired you get. Low-effort stuff is good, right?
Yeah, that is truthiness. I had a child in my 20s, and then I had a child in my 40s, and the tired is real, man. Like it is a very different thing to, like, on one hand you have wisdom and maybe some patience, and it's not your first rodeo. On the other hand, like, staying up past bedtime has much more severe consequences. So
everything does, you know, just eating the wrong things and doing the whatever, like sleeping wrong. Everything has consequences.
Yeah, or you can sneeze hard and hurt yourself. That was a new one with age too. That's fun.
Yeah, I would never have expected that, but yeah, I'm at the age now where sometimes I stand up the wrong way. It's like, oh, that's gonna hurt for the next 2 days. It's like, come on.
Do you ever stand up without groaning? Because I'm not sure that I do anymore.
Sometimes, sure, but there is that middle-aged dude groan. Yeah, quite often.
Yeah, I'm not sure what age it kicked in, but yeah, there became an age where I could sneeze, hurt myself sneezing instead of doing, like, it used to be you do something dumb and then you hurt yourself and there's a consequence for it.
Now you just exist and get hurt.
I slept on my side, so I'm gonna not be right for a month. Or I sneezed hard. Yep, you know, life's over for a little while.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Let alone sparring. It's like when you actually exercise, it's like 3 days afterwards. Oh, please kill me! I can't move.
I find that if I stay in the pocket, I'm just a constant sore, as opposed to like overwhelmingly exhausted. But you have to. I guess I don't spar the same way that you do. But if I keep active and I do martial artsy back and forthy movement, I'm definitely sore. And if you go really hard, like, you'll be more sore. But if I stop and only, like, if I do it once a week only, then I'm sore for 3 days afterward. But if I do it like 3 times a week, then I'm just constantly a little bit sore.
Mm-hmm. The younger people in your audience are going to be, oh, listen to those boomers. What is this?
Yes,
but they don't know yet.
Saturday morning.
You will find out.
Yeah.
You will find out.
That's right.
Well, not yet.
The Saturday morning complain about being old stream. That's we're up early and we don't like stuff.
Get off my lawn, damn kids.
Well, I suppose I can jump into stuff. Naturally, I am awful at observing chat. So just a heads up, if you spot something in there then please feel free and call it out. But I am known to be awful at it in advance. Sorry, everyone, for sucking at chat. But I will jump into some random topics around sword-related stuff. And that one is kind of topical. And that is recently there's been some hullabaloo about reviews in general. And most of it's been on like some AI products. Somebody reviewed a thing and they did it and, you know, they did not like it. And they were like, no, you got to say nice things about review stuff. Like, what are you doing? I'm just curious, since it's topical in the day, like, do you feel any particular way when you get, a sword sent to you to review? And do you have any feelings on if the company, goes under as a result potentially of your bad review?
I think I've just been sort of lucky in part, and partially it's also just because I always do so much research before buying anything or even before accepting something. I generally just dodge the really bad ones, and I have definitely gotten offers for stuff where I just looked at it like, this is shady. No, I don't like this. Like some cheap wall hangers and stuff where I'm just like, yeah, no, thanks for reaching out, but I've got too much to review already, which is always true anyway. So far, generally, whenever I've had bad things to say, they were receptive for the most part. There's just one example. I don't know how much of that is true and how much I'm reading into it, but I feel like Arms and Armor is not super fond of my tests of their polearms. I've heard them talk about, how reviewers test stuff and being way too hard. And then they told me directly that I was being too hard on stuff. And I'm still confused by that because, like, I hit a helmet with a polearm. You'd think that's what they were made for, right? And if it doesn't last for like 5 hits without breaking, then isn't that a problem? Like,
I don't honestly know. I think it could be said that you wouldn't aim for the helmet, and perhaps the way things were constructed, you knew if you hit a helmet too often that your polearm would not be as functional. So you.
Yeah, but if we look at the manuscripts about fighting and all kinds of imagery, they always go for the head. It seems like it doesn't matter if it's armored, unarmored. They clobber each other, which with a polearm makes a lot of sense. Like, I know how much you can get your bell rung even just with a blunt sword and a fencing mask. So, like, considering that some of the helmets, depending on the time frame and everything, some of the helmets were surprisingly thin. Even if you have a thicker helmet, if you get whacked in the head with a polearm, you're probably out of the fight. You're probably concussed.
Do you think rattling and whatnot then is, the weapon, you move to the next weapon or pick one up off the ground and
I mean, yes, on the battlefield you absolutely would, but I would expect them to last a bit longer than that. Because at that point I have to wonder, like, what's a polearm even for? Like, they were anti-armor weapons, like, what are you doing if you're not hitting armor? Are you going to ask them politely, hey, would you mind taking your helmet off for a second?
I guess I'm not sure, in the sense that should it rattle, right? Is I like, should you have some breaking? I think is one thing, like if it breaks apart at the socket or bends and is in some way unusable, but like developing, I think, some sort of jiggle or something like that is.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. That's not a problem, but the half breaking, it's a bit more of a problem.
I tested a glaive. They let me borrow one for a little while, and I whacked a Tommy and did some stupid things with it, but didn't like hit a metal helmet with it. And I had ever so slightly a wiggle after doing that, but you really had to wrench on it to feel it.
Yeah.
But it was also a glaive, and so I don't know that I can understand why somebody would whack a metal helmet, because yes, in sparring you do learn that, like, getting whacked in the head rings your bell. It's very disorienting, and so I could see why that would, even in armor, be a natural target. But I'm not sure what honestly to expect, because they break easy. If you make the half too thick, it becomes unwieldy, slow, and if you make it too thin, it breaks easy. But either way, it's wood, and like, it's not gonna hold up to, some really aggressive forces. A lot of pole arms that I've tested, even in like just cutting it to Tommy mat, the haft breaks. So
Yeah.
it's problematic. It makes me think I'm doing it wrong. But like I broke Naginata halves and Yari halves and all sorts of things. They always seem to break, except for the one from Quinn. That one didn't break.
Yeah. I mean, most things I've tested have not broken. I've heard an explanation for that supposedly in medieval times they used old growth trees, which were the wood was just stronger, and now it's just all younger trees that are being felled and maybe not seasoned quite correctly. Things like I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, so it would make sense. It could be, and generally I try to be open to feedback like that. If somebody thinks, hey, you went a little too hard with this thing, I'm like, okay, maybe I did. In this case, yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't think I did, because I wasn't even hitting them that hard. That was back on the West Coast and at the HEMA school there were some guys. If I had given it to them and told them hit it as hard as you can, yeah, I would kind of expect it to break, because some dudes hit really hard. That I don't know.
Yeah,
but either way, overall, it hasn't really been an issue generally. Like if there's something negative, they might not send me anymore, but I've never actually had complaints about it. I've never had negative feedback to a review.
That's fair. You've never been told by the vendor like, "Oh, you dummy, you don't know what you're doing." That's good.
Yeah, I said like Armstrong Armor is probably the closest, and I said maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe they don't actually, I've talked to them about it, and I've definitely heard this. You were very hard with the pole arm, and they replaced it. So can't complain about that. So I don't know how upset they really were with it, but other than that,
they have Arms and Armor is like a local company to me. They're like 10 miles away from where I live, and so it's easy to go there and see stuff. It does seem like they try to, I don't know, like if something was taken and yeeted into the Middle Ages or something, that the goal seems that it wouldn't completely look out of place, right?
Yeah.
And so the glaive that I played with from them had weird things that I guess I was not particularly a fan of, like the way this little crossguard thing was affixed. Seemed like it wouldn't hold up to this, that, or the other, but that was the way they were made in period. And so I'm not. There's this balance that they have to achieve between like, what does a modern person expect? Like how many licks do you expect to get out of your polearm haft before it breaks?
Yeah. And
is that antithetical to the way that they were assembled in period?
And that's really hard to say. I mean, like how long did it take? I mean, we know that hafts broke. Spears broke a lot. Going by the sagas and all that. Yeah, for sure, stuff definitely broke. It's just question how quickly, and how much does it take, which is very subjective. So that's, I think, where it comes from. If you have different ideas, because nobody can say that objectively. Yeah, it should take 47 swings, with a pole arm for it to break or whatever. It's hard to say, but yeah, overall.
But more than 5. We feel like it's more than 5.
that's kind of what I feel like. More than a couple. That's kind of
47 overall, maybe, but 5 no. It's a hard pass at 5.
Yeah, I will say Arms and Armor is probably more historically accurate than Albion, because Albion is very. It appeals much to the modern collector, but it's kind of sterilized, right? It doesn't have the imperfections that you would expect that they just made them with back in the day. So it's just kind of a modern take on it.
I had so I have an Arms and Armor Schloss Urbach sword, and I have a really old version of that sword that Arms and Armor was making before they had the collection from Ewart Oakshott. So they have the Oakshott Institute, so they have a bunch of like Ewart Oakeshott's collection in the same building, and they can kind of go and like reference the original. And then I got to see a new version of the Schloss Urbach and hold the original and my old one and the new one. You know, I've been actually, I want to do like a better video about it because I have one, they have the original. So I've been waiting for them to ping me when they have a new one. And I can make the video from the experience that I've already had, but in holding them and like comparing new and old, they certainly make a very convincing replica of original pieces, and not just like in the imperfections and appearance side of it, but like it feels, if I close my eyes, like they feel very similarly weighted objects. Obviously, I can close my eyes and do King Ninja with historical, you know, artifact stuff, but yeah, they do make very convincing replicas. So if your aim is to have a historically made sword, then they do that. I can imagine it's a tough balance, though. Albion seems to lean more into the what a modern consumer aesthetic would be. I happen to really like those things. It seems like a lot of people do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be backlogged for a year. Arms and Armor goes a different way.
Yeah, it just depends on what you like, really. And the things I still generally have to recommend their polearms because it's really hard to find functional polearms on the market in general.
Yeah.
And they're definitely the most historically accurate that I've seen, other than going with custom-made pieces that'll take like 3 years or whatever and will cost quite a bit more.
You mentioned something interesting in that you don't get a lot of, you know, bad feedback, but you also seem to be pretty wise in avoiding stuff. Have you had any swords that you didn't want to review? I'm curious, like where those fall into, like swords you didn't want to review, companies that seem shady.
Yeah, I mean, generally, if I don't want to review them, then I don't even get them to begin with. But yeah, I can't really think of too much. I mean, there were a couple of reviews that I've made of something that I didn't like a whole lot. Like, I remember there was a Austro-Hungarian saber. I don't even remember who made it. It's been a hot minute that I didn't like a whole lot. And yeah, it happens overall. But
I'm curious.
I can't really think of anything.
You got like when you see something, you're like, no, that's not for Skall. No.
Pretty much, yeah. At this point, usually when I see even just a picture, I usually see the red flags or things like I mean, material you can't go so much by anymore. I remember, like 10 years ago, you could pretty much tell by the material because if it wasn't high carbon steel or this and that. But now you have stuff made of 5160 that ends up being questionable quality. They've wisened up to that, so now they offer the materials that better swords are made of.
Yeah, the swordbuy.com, the like Shamshir stuff, they're made of stainless steel, and they shape wise, it's not that they're flawless, but they do sword things. So it's
in fact it's kind of a good example because Swordbuy would have been one of those things, and was one of those things where I just kind of squinted at it like, I don't know about that. It seems, first off, the name already is kind of weird. And they look like wall hangers, and that Shamshir definitely, it kind of, or Killich actually, did kind of look like that. But then it surprised me that it was actually perfectly functional. In fact, it's kind of a beater. Not as historically accurate as some others. Like if I compare that to the LK Chen Shamshir, it's no contest. The LK Chen one blows it out the water. It's way better. But for the price, it's quite good, really. I can't really complain.
Have you? That's a good example of sometimes like what you like. I'm not sure about that. And then in that case, though, I think the sword buy pieces look like when you open the box, you're like, oh, this is exactly what that photo looks like. It kind of looks like a wall hanger. It feels like a wall hanger.
Yeah.
But then you go to, you're kind of like, all right, is it going to shatter in my hand? And it does sword things. And it also like reinforces the importance of why distal taper is a thing on those swords.
Yeah.
And but it still does sword things reasonably well. Do you have any other examples of things that might have like surprised you as you you weren't expecting much, and then after handling it, you were like, Skall-likey.
Good question. I've reviewed so many things. The problem's, remembering them. I mean, I will say LK-Chan actually surprised me with their European stuff. Like, even though I already knew that the Chinese swords are very well made, I'm generally skeptical when I see this sort of pivot into something else entirely. It's like, oh, okay, we're specialized in this, and now we're making something completely different. It's like for example, what would be a good example? I feel like Hanwei generally is probably better for katanas than European swords. They have some good ones too, no doubt about it. But there are some that where you kind of like, yeah, this is your forte, and the other thing, Ronin, for example, as well. I mean, I did recommend the fairly affordable longsword that they made, like how many years ago, 5+. No, wait, it's 2024. 6 years, whatever. And it's again was pretty good for the price class. Now that LK-Chen makes such good European swords, it invalidates everything I said about a lot of the more affordable ones back then, because those are affordable now. But yeah, I would say that their katanas were definitely better than the European ones. You can tell that they have more experience with that and know more about it. Like the handles and the blades too, even the guards are just better on those. So sometimes, yeah, you might.
Ronin's I think a good example of like intent. As I understand it, so LK-Chen looks like they're the only European arms that I've held from them are examples that were their Messer and their Templar arming sword, and both of them are really excellent. They do. I agree, they did a very solid job. But it seems like they're working off designs from other folks, and they have a pretty solid idea of how to, like, what makes a sword good and needs to be in it. The Ronin katana, as I understand it, they weren't made to be like a particular historical object, and they were made for like backyard fun. And so the idea is like, hey, our swords are overbuilt, and not so much that you can't move them, but like you can go, like, don't whack a tree, but like if you do, it's probably gonna live. And I don't know. I don't know if the Templar sword or the Kriegsmesser, despite being quite durable for what they are, which are very lively things, if I were in any kind of scenario where I needed to use a sword and that sword was not being used on like a stationary cinder block like object, I choose the LK-Chen pieces. But if I'm using it as a camp tool, and I'm not trying to use it defensively against somebody who is trying to unalive me, then the Ronin katana is absolutely, like, I know, because I threw 80-pound rocks at it. Like they really hold up. They hold up quite well to very stupid things. But I think that was the goal. How do you separate that when you do a review? Do you look at, like, the intent of this was to be overbuilt and it's good at that, but I don't like it because there are more refined things? Or how do you noodle on that?
Yeah, definitely. If it depends on how they present it, because if they say, this is, if they make specific references to like a certain time period, or even an original that they then poorly copy, I'm not going to name names, but that kind of thing. If they fail to meet the goal that they set themselves, seemingly, then you can criticize that. But if it's just like, we want to make swords that are inspired by historical designs, but we want to make them very tough and durable, you can just have fun in your backyard cutting, then there's nothing wrong with that.
So hypothetically, Skall, funny question. What ridiculous conclusions do you think, like, archaeologists and anthropologists would come to if all of a sudden, like, calamity strikes and there's all of these found swords from 2024, right? Somebody finds my closet and they're like, oh, wow, Like what conclusions do you think people would come to about the day? Like, no digital record exists. They're just finding objects and making assumptions. What do you think they would they, they would think?
Good question, because they would also presumably find firearms, and if there are no written sources at all, I guess you would have to guess they reconstruct a society where both swords and guns were used. I don't know. Or maybe they would consider you like some kind of chieftain or like some important person who was buried with their prized possessions, has all these swords. Also, ceremonial. It's all ceremonial. We know that, right?
Yeah, no. What I've never heard in any kind of like assumption is like, this was just a crazy person that liked sharp things, or like,
yeah, because we have a bias toward assuming that people are being rational, and that's the lens through which we look at things too. Where sometimes they're like, yeah, we have no idea what this item is. Could be whatever. I mean, ceremonial is kind of giving credit for that. It's kind of like, okay, they did something weird, but we don't understand, some cultural thing that we don't know about, whatever, right? Which, yeah, fair enough. And sometimes, yeah, obviously there were eccentric people at all times, but it's a lower percentile, I guess. Like, chances are that this was something of greater cultural significance as opposed to just a single weird person, just statistically, but it's possible. So,
Yeah.
what they would make of it in the future, who knows? I mean, so much would be lost. Like, if the internet was gone, just EMP, whatever, just nothing work. Electronic devices don't work anymore. The internet is just down. All the data is just, the servers are just dead weights. It would be pretty tricky to reconstruct society now because so much is on the internet or explained by the internet.
Yes, I kind of wonder just what people would think, if they hold up a Ronin Euro arming sword, and then some sword nerd guy in the future that is like, well, they liked them big and heavy because apparently the trees were trying to kill them, which is why they would go and strike them in their backyard. I'm just wondering what kind of ridiculousness people would infer, though. I don't think in that case the homes would survive. It'd be all like the underground doomsday prepper bunkers that might be around. And they'd be like, yeah, people, this must have been a chieftain living with his MREs. And
yeah,
I'm not sure. Anyway, it's something
even funnier. It would be even funnier if they happened to find the original sword that was in a museum and they also find the reproduction, and it's like, there's so much time in between these. That must have been a really popular object that they kept making them over centuries.
Yes. These swords and the original Nintendo. I'm curious about bias, because you mentioned before some thoughts on like, well, we have biases. We think of people as rational. Bias is obviously something that incorporates into reviews. How do you control yours, or how do you be aware of it?
Well, being aware of it, yeah. I mean, basically, when I approach something, I try to think first off, how much do I know about it? Is this, is this a long sword, which I've handled many of, which kind of goes in two directions. On the one hand, being very familiar with something means that you're more objective in comparing it because you have a certain baseline. You have an informed opinion. But on the other hand, if you gravitate toward that also means you're biased in favor of it rather than something else. So with something you're familiar with, it's easy enough. When you then look at something that you haven't handled much, it's like, could you have a bias? Probably. In some cases, it's obvious, or it becomes obvious over time, shall we say. I went through this whole arc with katanas where in my youth as an edgy teenager, I was like, oh yeah, Japan is great, katanas. Yeah. And then, then came the phase where like everybody was talking crap about katanas because they're overhyped and blah. And then you become kind of biased against it. And then you try to work against the bias. It's kind of ups and downs. But at this point, if you try to be aware of that and actively counter steer, then eventually, presumably, you reach a point where you have a well-informed opinion and are no longer biased. Or at the very least, like, if you're not able to eliminate your bias, you should at least acknowledge it, right? That's fine. For example, I've got a personal aversion to the wrap on a katana. Just the way it feels. I just don't like it. I've handled a bunch of different ones, and yeah, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but there's something about those knots that I don't like. I don't like how it feels. So I tend to prefer the ones with a smooth grip, or sometimes you have ones that have just the raised skin, stuff like that. Yeah. I can't explain why. It's just a lot of people like it, and I handle them like, can we get this off? I don't know why. It is what it is. But as long as you're aware of it and point it out, that because the mistake here would be to criticize that. Like, oh, the handle is horrible. It's not ergonomic. It doesn't feel good. Whatever. You present it as an objective criticism, which it's not. It's just a personal thing. As long as you're being transparent with that, it's fine.
That's an interesting take. For some reason, this reminds me of a friend of mine who doesn't like seafood. And then people are always like, but what about shrimp? Like, but what about crab? But what about sushi? And it's like, if it swims or it's in the water, no. And they're like, but what about crawfish? Like, what about gumbo? And if you don't like katana wraps, like my immediate gut reaction is like, maybe if it were like that, there's a variation on good and bad. And I'm not sure exactly how much experience you have with it. So I'm tempted to be like, but what about, but then I'm like, you just don't like it. That's fine. You don't have to like
it. That's definitely something to keep in mind. Sometimes you don't like the type, you just don't like how it's done here in particular. Because, I mean, there are plenty of horribly made longswords. And if I handle one of those, I'd be like, oh, what the hell is this? That doesn't mean that longswords are bad.
No,
so
I have the same thing with Viking hilts. I
don't like them either.
I just can't make them feel good. It always wants to not sword in my hand. It seems like, but that's a useful. It's interesting to hear the thoughts on presenting your bias or being aware of it. I often run into things that I'm not educated about, but my shtick is smashing them on a rock or something like that. So you don't have to be particularly educated about a thing to hit it with a rock or to try. Do you find it's hard for you to talk about things that you're unfamiliar with? Do you feel an urge to become more, well-read about a particular thing before you talk about it? Or are you of the opinion that something is better than nothing?
Yeah, I generally try to look into it and get more familiar with it. In some cases, I just don't find anything, like particularly a lot of Middle Eastern swords. There's not a whole lot of information in English, I'm assuming. That's sometimes just the issue. Same thing with some Chinese sources. There's plenty, but I just can't read them. And then I end up losing patience. If it's just like, I gotta, brood over it and just try to find good sources. Eventually, I just become impatient. And then it's just like, okay, I'm just going to approach it with kind of an outsider perspective. There is some value to it, in my opinion, because sometimes if you're kind of more unbiased if you know less about it, and you just approach this thing, you pick it up, you look at it, you handle it, you test it, and then you come up with whatever conclusion. I think that works too. Now, you have to be prepared for people to complain about, oh, I can't believe you didn't know this. Like, yeah, sorry. I don't know everything.
I am well acquainted with that. Right?
Yeah.
how much is done better than perfect in your view of YouTube reviewing? So
Better
a
than
little more
perfect?
like in how the sausage is made. So when I go and I film my stupid face and I'm recording stuff and I do it and then I'm like, oh, I wish I had done. Oh, I should do.
Yeah.
You can go down that rabbit hole
Yep.
forever. So when do you draw the line? When is done better than perfect? If that makes more sense.
When I run out of time and gotta upload the next video, quite frankly. That, having a schedule helps with that, because at some point you just okay. I mean, sometimes I will postpone, just make another video, like a shorter one, and just spend more time on that. But sometimes it's just like, okay, I gotta finish this now in some kind of way. So, and yeah, you can kind of work around it based on the presentation. The simple fix is, if you don't know enough about it, don't talk about it. Like, there's still other things to talk about or show, or, so it's not necessarily a problem. Sometimes, you can definitely fall into the trap of drawing conclusions that are incomplete because there's something you just didn't know. Like, for example, complaining about how a particular guard is shaped or whatever, and then you find out afterwards, oh, well, it's not actually supposed to be used the way you thought. Like, you're not supposed to catch something on the guard. It's just there to prevent the hand from slipping up. Things like that. Or criticizing. Right. Something I remember just recently. I was about to talk about steel scabbards. Because I have a few sabers with a steel scabbard where, like, every time you unsheath it, you're like, oh no, it's really hard to prevent it from grinding up the edge. It's fine if it's single edge, because then you just press it with the spine against the steel, and it's fine. But it has a sharpened false edge, so at the end is just, it's very hard to avoid that. But then I remember hearing that some steel scabbards had some kind of organic lining, wood or whatnot. But when I looked it up, I couldn't find anything about it. So I was like, okay, let me just not mention that. If I can't confirm it, it's better to leave it out.
And when you revisit topics like that, I imagine the YouTube algorithm is not particularly supportive, right? Of, hey, here's just like some extra tidbit. Let me release a video. To the people that are interested, they might look into it. But then you have an abysmally performing video, which tends to cascade. Does that play into, like, do you have to think about that before you put any other kind of supplemental information?
Yeah.
I think maybe a broader question would be, like, how much does the algorithm play with what you would really like to do? If you could just
quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's definitely sometimes, I feel like making this or that kind of video, and then I realize the algorithm's going to punish me for it. It's going to then mess with the views on the following uploads after that. Kind of the workaround that I've come up with is basically, well, put it up on Patreon. That way it's not affected by the algorithm cycle. I'm still making it. Somebody still gets to enjoy it, and there you go. So that kind of works.
Is there a big disparity between the types of videos YouTube rewards and the types of videos Skall wants to make?
Somewhat. It depends on what it is. I mean, it's even hard to answer that, because I'm so ruled by moods sometimes. Like, I'm just spontaneous and all over the place. And, like, on one particular day, I'm like, I want to do this now. And that's also why sometimes there's a bit of time pressure behind it, because sometimes I have the impulse to make something, and I know that if I don't finish it within a day or two, it's going to be gone, and then I will not want to finish it. It's like, that's a thing. And other times it's just like, sometimes I feel like I might even start a video, and then, when I edit it, I just look at it more and more like, this is not good enough. Delete, screw it, or put it up as bonus content. It happens.
I can hear you on that one. I find it to be given that this is a hobby, right? So I get to play by a slightly different set of rules, and I have a day job, which is my master, and then over here I get to do this for fun, and so hopefully it's helpful and hopefully it's entertaining. And when it's not, I just get to stop. But there are definitely those times where I said I'd do a thing, the weather's working, and I'm not in the mood, and I just stop. And watching a big 5-headed goober swing a sword while being miserable about it just does, it's not fun for me, and I don't imagine it's fun for anyone else to watch this.
Sometimes it is like I put up this one video where I tried to do cutting on that day, and it just nothing worked. Like every cut was horrible. I was getting progressively more aggravated and annoyed and just ranting. And then afterwards I looked at it like, you know what? This is such a disaster. Let's put it up. Somebody will find it funny. And people did. They did like that. So, and fun and relatable. I was like, yeah, sometimes, but it has to be bad enough. It can't just be like, I'm tired and I don't quite feel like it. Whatever, something. If it's just that kind of the mundane, regular, just don't feel like it, then sometimes you just got to push through it or discard it, whatever. But if it's bad enough, now we got something.
Now we're cooking with fire.
Now we're cooking.
Joe has a good question here. What impact has being a YouTube content creator been in your life? Any regrets? Do you wish you chose other genres? Have you been into swordcraft all your life from YouTube? I'm interested in particular in the content creator regrets. Would you have done anything different? I can leave that up for you.
No major regrets. I mean, there's always smaller things like, oh, I wish I had done this video a little bit differently or that or whatever. Like, yeah, there's some things here and there, but nothing really overall that's major regret. I mean, sometimes I'm thinking if I could redo it all, I would try to do like the anonymous sword reviewer or whatever, where I just don't even show myself, or like, wearing, like playing a persona, like wearing a mask or something. That would be but a lot of the stuff I do just wouldn't work quite the same way if I did that. So yeah, other genres, again, it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm thinking like, wouldn't it be great to do like a travel channel or whatever, like a food review channel or some bullshit. Yeah, I just kind of naturally tend to gravitate, feel the pull in different directions. But swords is kind of one of the constants, where a lot of other things, like I get into it for a while, I get super into it, and then suddenly the brain is like, nah, boring, don't want it anymore. So yeah, I can stick to this. And yeah, I mean, of course, it's been a big deal, just being able to make a living with what I care about, what I love to do. Is, yeah, I would never, I would never want to give that up, if possible. I mean, at some point the channel just might not be viable anymore. If I come to that place, I might just try to start something else, also on YouTube. Yeah, and yes, I have been into sword stuff most of my life. In some kind of way, swords have been fascinating. Like as a kid, I was into Masters of the Universe. Like, oh, He-Man, great. Swords and in popular media, all of that. So yeah, it's been a constant.
I don't know if you would have had the same luck if you had. There's all these popular genres that seem to ebb and flow a little bit,
yeah.
But like travel channels and food review channels and this and that. Even if you had started when you did and benefited from years of hard work, it's like the nicheness of the content has kind of made you the big swinging dick in the room. Like you're the in the realm of people that talk about swords. Oh, perfect. Your swagger, I love it there. Skall does swing dick motion. But if you had jumped on the bandwagon that a lot of other people did, you'd have to compete with so many other people. And there's just not a lot of people that talk about the type of thing that you do on the internet.
Yeah.
And so you've become I think the largest channel that like at least isn't selling something that talks about this kind of thing. So I think Mini Katana technically would be the largest sword channel. They have like
probably
millions and millions of subscribers, but I think it's a slightly different scenario there in terms of like talking about history, martial arts, swords, the intermingling of those things. That's I think you're the largest channel that does that, if I'm not mistaken. And if you had just talked about hamburgers or, I think that would have, like, even if you specialized, you're going to just review caviar. I don't think you would have.
Yeah, I've got licorice reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely at the right, or in the right place at the right time, because it's quite obvious that now even that niche is filled out quite a bit more, and starting now would be way more harder than it was back then. And yeah, you can definitely see over time, there's not only are there more other channels, I'm also not sure if the interest has grown at the same rate as the coverage, if you will. I mean, probably to an extent, at least HEMA has gotten a lot bigger than it used to be. But either way, yeah, it's a lot harder to maintain the audience now. So
I think there's so many more options now. Obviously, there's more people talking about the subject. There's more sword channels than there used to be. There's more people vying for the attention of a set of eyes. But there's also just more things to do for people, right? I think that there was some study that there's like 300 million people on the planet that fancy themselves content creators. And the vast, vast majority of them are doing it for free and pouring in time and doing all of this effectively for no monetary gain, but still espousing that is their profession. So it's kind of a weird market, but that means there's a lot of people out there that are effectively talking about things that are of interest and doing it for free, and a lot of people vying for the attention of your eyes. Not necessarily just about swords, but about anything.
Everything. I mean, like even back then, like 2010s or even earlier, gaming channels were already a thing, and there's plenty then already. And now it's just an ocean of gaming channels and plenty of other things too, like the more mainstream things, like be it sports and vehicles and fashion and whatnot. It's saturated even more.
Yeah, it would not be fun to start. It would not be it would not be a great time to jump in. So there is, I imagine, an element of right place, right time, but the nicheness of it, I think, is also like very specific, because there wasn't there's very few places to find information about it, very few people that talk about the subject in general, and as you start, you get better at like making videos. Very few people make it's not watchable content, but digestible content that's easy, that you don't have to continue watching in spite of the presentation. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Filmed on a potato, you get what I'm throwing down.
Yeah, and just 5-minute rambles before they even start to get to the point of the video, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's plenty.
I resemble that comment. What lessons have you learned in being a content creator? Like, if you look back at what today Skall knows and when Skall started, what would you go back from not just overall life? I'm sure you'd be like, invest in Tesla or something. But if you could go back to when you started, what tips and tricks around like presentation and camera work and making a coherent thought would you give yourself?
One of the things is definitely multiple editing rounds, because that's where I usually catch most of the extra fluff to cut away is on the second or third, because like stuff that while you're recording, there are things that come to your mind and everything, and you think this is relevant, And then because you've just talked about it, then when you edit, you still think like, yeah, it still makes sense to you. But then if you come back to it a day later or whatever, and then you watch it again, you're like, nobody cares. Cut. It's superfluous. So that's definitely a good one. Another is that I always tell people is get good audio gear, because people can sit through potato footage a little bit more. I mean, at least what's now considered potato footage, not back in the day, because that was horrendous. Like, 2008 potato footage was literally unwatchable. But now, even like something that somebody recorded on the phone, it's okay. The more important thing is, can people understand you? Because there's too many videos where it's like somebody's talking, just using the onboard audio, which is always horrible for most cameras, and then standing a certain distance away, there's background noise, there's like people just tune out because they can't hear a word. That's definitely important.
Audio gear.
Yeah,
I think that's
I'm seeing that more and more.
Yeah.
The microphone that I'm using here, Rode Wireless Go 2, I see that all the time now in videos. A lot of people use that just because it's so convenient. Either that or the DJI version of that it works.
Not me. Nope, I just scream at the camera and no, I usually sit down and have audio gear. But that was like I think a very long time in before I happened upon a microphone, and I didn't invest in it. Like, I tripped on one and was like, oh, I should use this. And then I think I got it at like a garage sale or something like that. And then I immediately, the feedback was like, oh, Fivehead, we can hear you now. That's yeah, I hear you now.
Another kind of minor thing, but it still makes a lot of difference. I don't know why the hell I waited this long to get a boom arm for this microphone. It's so dumb. For the longest time, I had it just on a tripod, standing on the floor. It's always like you got to make sure to not bump it, and sometimes vibration transfers through it and whatever. It's an annoyance. This is just, come on, this is so easy. Do it.
Yeah.
I don't know why I waited this long. Yeah, you've got one too. It's like, it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah, that I was surprised by that as well. Not just so I have, well, thoughts. Sorry, words stumble. There's like a wall of monitors around me because I work here and I edit here and I play games and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff. But on the main system that I use, having arms, basically boom arms for your monitors, did kind of the same thing. And I was like, oh my God. If I'm like in hyper concentration mode, I can pick this up and move it right in my face. And then I'm just, that's so handy. Like, rather than adjust me, I can find where ass is good and then move monitor to face. It like blew my mind how dumb it was.
Yeah.
So it was like, I worked for years where I didn't do that. And then I got a set of monitor arms, and they like instantly made a huge difference and made me feel really stupid for not spending the $200 or whatever it is for these generic monitor arm things that changed my life. The boom mic is kind of the same thing, like having a good mic and then like putting the mic where it's supposed to be. Solid things. Though Windows constantly changes the volume of my mic. So like I get everything set up and I'm like, all right, that's where I want it. And then Windows is like, no, you want this like dialed back to volume setting number 1, so that when you go to record things, it just screws everything up. How many times do you have to redo videos, Skall, where you just like, you do voiceover and you're like, oh yeah, I completely fucked all that up and it's worthless and I got to do it again?
More often than I care to admit. It happens. I mean, not as much anymore over the years. I wisen up to some things, and it doesn't happen quite as much anymore. But for a while, particularly batteries. I hate camera batteries. It's still a problem. Now, usually when I can, I plug in an AC adapter into the computer, so I don't even have to worry about it. But sometimes that's not an option. And in particular, GoPros, I hate at this point. They've disappointed me so many times. They just need to, I want to shoot them at this point. I might. Anyway,
well,
so, yeah.
Topical. There's a question here from Romance of Men. Romance of Men is a manufacturer of armor and swords and katanas and all sorts of stuff. You guys do entertaining videos like katana cutting bullets, mini katana kind of videos. If you do, and I'm guessing you'll get a lot more views. Any thoughts on doing on shooting more sword Skall? Because I know you've done it.
I've done it a bunch of times. I've done the splitting a bullet with the blade. I've shot a blade in half intentionally, not just unintentionally. The one time way back, people still rubbing my face after almost 10 years.
Long memory on the internet, Skall. Long memory.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's these days that kind of thing. I would love to do that more, but these days it's a bit more difficult because since moving to Nova Scotia, the ranges here kind of suck. At least the ones in the area. Back then, I was able to just drive to the range and just set stuff up and shoot whatever armor. I haven't found anywhere to do that here, but there's still other things that could be done. In fact, that reminds me, I still have on my to-do list a video of just hardcore testing a cheap sword with an expensive one, just to see how bad is it. I mean, I've done that somewhat. I've done it with the Zombie Tools Difles. I've done tests on like a cheapo knife at least to see like how far can it cut into it, and yeah. But that would be kind of neat to do more of. Yeah.
I would imagine there are some challenges. I think so. Romance of Men, they're based in China, and there may be a view that like on this side of the world that we can just pew 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 like in our backyard, but they're pretty sensitive about where you shoot things, and there are a lot of ranges that will not let you set up swords. I may or may not have asked everyone in my area to be able to. Is like if there's a time where I could film, but they're always like sensitive, especially in indoor ranges, because I live where it's perpetual winter. You are familiar with this, Skall, as a Canadian. Like if the range has been being shot all day, there's like pulverized lead juice in the background, and they don't really want you to go like breathe it and set stuff up. And so yeah, it's not actually super easy. You got to find an outdoor range and one that like nobody wants to use, or somebody with a lot of land that can, and that means like a lot of driving. And that also means like it's surprisingly stressful as a one-man show to do that, because you're like, I got to bring the swords, and then I got to drive there, and then like this is my whole day activity is shooting this sword, and then like hopefully it doesn't rain. And also, did I charge the fucking camera battery? Did I bring the charger with me? Do I have a way to plug it in? Like, did I get the footage? That's the other like if I shoot my camera accidentally or shrapnel flies in the lens, like I'm off of YouTube for quite a while. This is
yeah. I remember that one time we drove 1.5 hours out only for me to find that I don't have my SD card. I can't record shit. That was great.
No. Well,
it happens.
Some clarity. I'm trying to ask, what's more important in creating video for views of the stuff you like to do?
Okay. I mean, when you start out, it's more you're doing the stuff you like to do, but when you turn it into a full-time job, then you have to care about what people want to see a little bit more, because otherwise bills don't get paid. So, but it's still, ideally it's both. I generally prioritize the things that I want to do and that I think people will want to see. So most of the time, it's not really an issue. When it is, you have to prioritize more what people want, but it's not necessarily an issue.
People demand foot pics, Skall, so you need a separate camera angle of just your feet. That is apparently it's the next trend. You got it here for yourself for YouTube.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know what. There's apparently a lot of people out there who enjoy feet, but I don't get it.
I'm just saying, do it for the views, buddy.
Good for them, I guess. But I mean, good for whoever makes money that way, because it's just about the easiest.
Yep, you'll have the Skall review, but then you'll have just ongoing toe cam on a separate.
Although I probably just underestimate how much foot maintenance goes into it. You know, like do your foot spas and your, like you got to get a pedicure all the time. I don't know how that works, but I'm assuming there's probably more involved than meets the eye.
I would, that's a fair point. There is a lot more to just about everything, you're in a position to appreciate it. I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are like, oh, you just, pick up something, go whack some stuff in your backyard, and talk at a camera for a couple minutes. It can't be that hard.
Yeah, no, totally not. Totally not all the, coming up with an idea and setting everything up and recording it and struggling with the gear sometimes and then cleaning up afterwards and then editing for hours and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's just, you just turn it on and you put it up. Done. I mean, I remember back in the day, sometimes you had those videos. The video starts with a blurry face because somebody turns on the camera, and it ends with them reaching to turn the camera off. It's like, you just put that up? That's it? Okay.
Yeah, in theory, it could absolutely work. It's totally possible, but I don't know. There's a style where that works and a style that I don't think it does.
Yeah.
If you have a particular, I don't know, there's a way to make things like cinematic and nice, and also a type of content or personality where you can tolerate that. But I don't think I have that personality or cinematic style. I think I need to do everything I can to make the content as digestible as possible, so coherent and understandable by humans. All right, I'm gonna pivot a little bit to I'm gonna pivot to a super chat because somebody paid money to ask a question. So I should. Skall, what happened to the VA Brighton that you shot? I know it was one of the blades from when they used to use Chinese blades, but was it ever fixed?
I'm trying to remember, what did I actually do with it? I sent it somewhere. I just can't remember. Did I give it away? Did I send it back to them for repair? I honestly can't remember. I don't know what happened to it. I didn't throw it away. I shipped it somewhere. I know that, but I can't even remember. That's been like 7 years, probably.
How many swords would you say you've gone through? Like, because I imagine there's the collection, there's what you review. In terms of like where you're at now, how many swords from you've spent at least a day in your possession having? Because I know that's going to be a lot. Are you in the thousands?
No, it's got to be hundreds. I don't think it's thousands. It's probably
you're slacking.
I want to, yeah. I can't imagine it's more than 200. I could be wrong. I haven't counted them.
With all the stuff that you get sent and that you play with, in that 200?
I mean, maybe it's more.
I'd have to imagine you have more than 200 videos, Skall. Like, you've been at this for a decade.
Oh yeah, but it's not a sword per video. Let's see. Yeah. If I just do it like a random guess, let's say.
And I don't mean like any sword you picked up at a shop, but like anything that you've had
I know.
To form an opinion on.
Yeah, I really don't think it's much more than 200. It might not even be that. I don't think it's a large number, obviously, but I can't imagine it's that many.
Wow, I'm actually a little bit surprised by that. I've between like the video footage, and I used to take like a lot of photographs of the collection and stuff that I had. It's really easy to lose track, and I went back a while ago and I was like, oh wow, oh, that's more than I thought. And I was kind of under the impression you'd have had more than I did, given, like I said, big swinging dick in the room over here, getting all all sorts of stuff. People pining for your attention to play with their swords. I would have thought that there'd be well into the thousands.
No, definitely not thousands. No, I mean, yeah, but it's hard for me to even estimate because so many things are just I've done like 12 years ago or whatever, or longer, and I have like a vague recollection. Yeah, okay, I did some kind of review there, and there's a lot of stuff that's just I don't even know. Maybe it's 300, but
Fair enough.
I
Well,
can't even begin to guess.
Based on like the things you can recall, I'll give you some classic questions. What in your mind is the worst sword you've ever reviewed? And I can include the ones that like maybe you had in your hand and didn't review, but like just the worst sword you've had, even if you didn't review it.
I mean, the worst one I've had must have been there was like a wall hanger ninja sword that I had as a teenager. That, yeah, easily that's the worst. It was just 440 stainless, and
Do
it
you
was a
still
piece
have
of crap. No, I got rid of that probably. Let me think. I got rid of that in 2000 or 2001, so it's been a little while.
It doesn't sound like that long ago, but it was so long ago.
Yeah.
All right. You talked about this before, that you pass on reviews. Is there any one that in particular stands out that you passed on, and like what, apart from like skip the shadiness, but like crappy swords, is there a specific example that you're like, that just doesn't look fun for me to play with?
Yeah, there were definitely some questionable wall hanger things. I don't even remember the maker or website or something.
Oh, I lost your audio, I think. Did I lose audio? Can you hear me, Skall? This might be a me problem. Chat, can you hear Skall? Okay. Skall is silent. All right, so I'm not crazy, Skall. It seems like
That should be good.
You nailed it.
No.
Yep, I gotcha.
I somehow, while gesticulating, I closed my audio program here. I don't even know how I did that, but yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah. Right. So those really generic Euro sword wall hangers where you just have the simplest little leather handle and like weirdly shaped small or overly small or overly large pommels, just weird proportions, and like super simple, stainless. Well, not even stainless. Sometimes they make them of high carbon steel, but they just look off. Like, you know what I mean, right? That this kind of generic knight sword that just looks nothing like what they used back then.
How often do you get asked to review stuff completely unsword related that's like, review this lawnmower, talk about this desk light? Do you get thousands of those requests?
Not so much review requests, but sponsorship requests. Yeah, all kinds of random crap, like online casinos and well, I guess the beard trimmer is sort of related, but a bunch of random things. Yeah, that definitely happens. They all end up in the spam folder.
I find it's fun to respond to them and ask them for several examples of this to be chopped apart with a sword. And then I find that that's better than I subscribe.
I've done that once back in 2014, I believe, where a shoe manufacturer reached out to me, wanted to sponsor a video. I'm like, Well, I guess I can chop them up with swords and shoot them with guns. And they're like, yep, do it. Okay, we're doing this now. So yeah, I did that once. And I made the video just like that, just be like, so I got shoes sent to me. I don't care about shoes. I mean, not for the purpose of the channel at the very least. Good shoes are important, but this was just like, okay, whatever. And then, yeah, I took them out in the woods, I chopped them up, and one of them, and then the other I took to the range, and I shot with 12 gauge, and things happened.
And the shoes were not bulletproof. You found it.
No, not quite. I mean, maybe against birdshot, but buckshot, not so much.
All right. What is there anything out there that would be like really personally interesting for you to test? If somebody was saying like, hey, Skall is in heat for a particular sword. He wants to do some sort of video, but doesn't have the thing. What would you like?
I still want a Swiss saber at some point. Those are really nice, with the complex hilt and everything. It's just there's not much in the way of options of historically accurate functional reproductions. You can get, I think Todd makes one that's beautiful, but that's a bit rich for my current budget. That's the thing. Like, you can get really nice ones, but you're looking at like 3,000 plus or whatever. And then the others, there are a few budget options that just I have really not much confidence in. But that would be great. And
how much money is too much money for a sword?
What's like, too much money for a sword?
Yeah, like, is there a price where you're just like, no?
Yeah, to me the cutoff is 2,000, and that already has to be something special, like the Knecht, for example. Generally, for the most part, I'm not really willing to go much higher than 1,500.
Fair enough. I cut you off. You said there was another one following the Swiss saber.
Oh yeah, a Polish saber would also be interesting, because again, same problem. They're kind of hard to find, like really well-made ones.
What? So that's what you would like to do. Is there? I don't know that sword reviews are ever a particularly successful video. At least based on my personal experience, they don't seem to be garnering a whole lot of attention. But that's fine. I'm just curious: is there a sword review that would be really successful? Like what? Either type of sword, or how would you make it more interesting to the most people possible?
I mean, as a big project, I'm pretty sure people would like, going to Japan to a traditional maker and seeing how they do stuff and testing one of the genuine swords, because that's definitely something to keep in mind a lot of the time. Like, basically, whenever anyone makes a statement about katanas in general online, like 95% or 99% of people who make statements about them have never handled an original made in Japan, right? So I do have to wonder, like, how much of a difference is there? How good are the reproductions really? And that's at least an access point. You can't do that with medieval ones. I mean, kind of, you can handle originals in the museum, can't cut with them usually, but yeah, that would be interesting. But at the same time, people have already done that. So I don't know how much interest there still is in that.
Fair enough. I always dream that if you could get literally one of every kind of a thing, right? It seems like what garners a lot of interest is all the things and price point. Anytime there's a high dollar value, the video tends to do better.
True.
Anytime there's a lot of stuff, the video, like those are two little things that tend to pull the lever a little bit in terms of a sword review. But I'd imagine if you could get like, hey, I have a Type 14. Here's all of them currently available on the market, and I'm going to juggle them. I don't know if you could do something, but like all of the examples, like you want a Type 14, it's going to be one of these sons of bitches. Let's see like how they stack up against each other. I think that would be, I don't know, that's a compelling kind of content that is hard to do because it would require hundreds of thousands of dollars to have or millions to have all of the examples. I don't know that you would go into the super custom end of things, because obviously that's different. But if you had anything that you could conceivably get off the shelf, That would be I think that would be fun. But
At some
also
point, I would love
terrifying
to
to do.
try something made by Manning Imperial. That's another one of those makers that are just generally outside of my preferred price range, but it's good stuff. From what I'm seeing, it looks like extremely high quality, and historical accuracy is also exceptionally high.
I have never heard of this.
Yeah, they're in Australia.
Yes.
And particularly what they do is they make a lot of ancient swords, like Greek and Roman and Celtic and all that. Which reminds me, I actually once got on the waiting list for a sword made by Patrick Barta, Temple. It was supposed to be a Celtic sword, and that was many years ago. I don't know what happened, but I never got a response on that. I got on the waiting list, and then
you may still be on the list, Skall. You may still be.
Yeah, maybe like 10 years later, he suddenly, I can make the sword for you now. Like,
would you do it? I think the price has probably gone up a little bit. Would you?
Yeah,
you're going to blow your budget out of the water.
At this point, I don't know. I mean, there's always the option to get something just for the review and then sell it. But the problem is, in this kind of price range, it's difficult to sell.
Yes. Patrick Barta, Peter Janssen, and trying to think of, there's a few others, but those are smiths that I've never gotten a chance to hold their works before.
Right.
And, sometimes you can look at a photo and say, I'm pretty confident, like I wouldn't like it or I would. And that can be deceptive. Right. But then sometimes there's photos and you're like, yeah. Like I don't normally get horny for swords. Like I didn't realize that was a thing that could happen. But some of the work from Patrick Barta is like that. We were like, I think I need to like go to therapy or something. Like I that is so pretty. I want to part with so much of my money for those.
Yeah, you can't beat those. Just in terms of just sheer luxurious bling. It's yeah.
There's some zazziness. All right, I'm sucking at super chats, by the way. Thank you, folks, for sending money. You don't have to, by the way. It does. Admittedly, I suck at chat, and when it shows up in a different color, I notice it more. So, but it's not because you're giving me money. It's because I'm like, ooh, a piece of candy. You don't have to send money. Just a heads up. You don't have to. But thank you for doing it, guys. Big fan. Skall got me into collecting. Matt got me. Is the guy that I got into for reviews. What swords would you dream of reviewing? Fable Blades?
Oh yeah, Fable Blades is also a good one. Yeah, and yeah, we just talked about Patrick Barta. That would be that's kind of like the holy grail. But yeah, Fable Blades too, just for a different kind of purpose. If you like really high-end fantasy blades, then yeah, there you go.
All right, so they send you a Fable Blade, Skall, but you have to, at the end of the review, shoot it to death. Would you do it? You have to destroy it. Or would you say no?
If that's how I get my hands on one, yeah, sure, I'll shoot it. If that's what they need me to do, I would piss on it too if that's what it takes.
Is there a sword you would not review if you had to destroy?
I mean, any antique, really.
You wouldn't pee on it, show foot pics, shoot it to death. You'd be like, I'm sorry, I can't destroy history.
Other than that, I mean, okay, if it gets really ridiculous, if it's like a $30,000 sword or something crazy, now I'll be like, no, it's too wasteful. I mean, okay, generally, that's kind of the issue here. I hate wasting things, so it would just be like, if this is the only way I can review a Fable Blades, I would do it. But yeah, I do hate.
I don't think anyone is going to give you this like moral dilemma. It's just funny to think about because like Mr. Beast is over there chucking Lamborghinis into a wood chipper. It's conceivable that the threat of impending doom would get more attention.
I actually really hate this kind of content where like some rich YouTubers just destroy a bunch of perfectly good things, whether it be vehicles or whatever. It's like, come on, we don't live in a world with infinite resources. Somebody could have driven that. Like, just give it away or something. Come on, that bugs me.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a, you know, it touches on subjects that are unsword related, granted, but I do find
Oh
it.
yeah, that's what I mainly mean.
Yeah,
Because when it comes to when it comes to destructive testing a sword, there's some value to it, because sometimes you find things out about it that you wouldn't otherwise have known, like weak spots or like weirdly large grain in the blade or something like that. So there's a purpose to it. But a several $100 sword is one thing. Trashing a $50,000 car or 100,000 or some crazy stuff like that. No, that's where you lose me.
it is a perplexing thing though in the case of at least the Mr. Beast, right? Because you yeet a Lamborghini into a thing, but then like you take a lot of that money and like build wells in Africa. Like it seems like the attention economy is creating wealth because you're doing something that garners a lot of attention, but then like with that you do things that otherwise wouldn't be done. It's like I agree, like putting the Lamborghini in the wood chipper is not it's kind of like it does seem wasteful, but then if it comes with like people have water now or like can see or the other number of charitable things, that it's not always done that way though. In fairness, I imagine every Lamborghini that's blown up or destroyed for clout is not letting people hear for the first time. But
yeah, also I don't think I would be comfortable doing that personally, just because it kind of taints the outcome. Because like, okay, so you're doing something good, it's like humanitarian aid and whatnot, but you're kind of tainting it by, I mean, just the juxtaposition in and of itself. On the one hand, you have people who don't even have access to clean water. On the other hand, some rich douchebag destroys whatever expensive thing that could feed a family for years over there. It's like it doesn't sit right with me,
Weird
even
time.
if the outcome is positive, bottom line.
Somebody could have worn those shoes though, buddy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, somebody could have worn those shoes. Yeah, I'm guilty of that too, just on a smaller scale. Somebody could have drunk the water that
they were like, "Those are my size, guy. Like, what are you doing?"
Yeah, I mean, I try to be as sustainable as possible. I've literally used bath water to soak newspaper rolls to cut. Not
every one of those cuts had a little bit of Skall in them.
Yeah, exactly. That water is not going anywhere else. It's not going to be bottled and sold.
There's a fair amount of recycling and like finding things you're going to throw away and then be like, let me get some more use out of them. Let me cut them first.
Yeah, if you can avoid wasting a resource, then yeah, why not?
Switching topics here a little bit. Is there any video that you are particularly proud of, or if there's not one that stands out, is there a video that like demonstrated a turning point in how you tell stories on YouTube?
I don't think there's a turning point in particular. It's just things gradually change over time. It's just a slow process. But yeah, some things, of course, like some particularly high effort videos, I like. I still like the bit I did for the throwing cross video, like the Castlevania intro. I think that turned out quite well and was fun to make. And also things like shooting helmets and the series that I did of testing different helmets. That was, that took quite a while. That was pretty involved, both in terms of costs and time demands and all of that. Yeah, the high effort stuff, of course, you're particularly happy about and proud of.
When you think of those high effort videos, are there any like that you just can't start because they're big? Like, are there projects that you would like to do, but they're just you're daunted by them?
Yeah, definitely. I don't
mean financially either. I mean like just like how do I make this a video? How would I do that? And like, work.
It's what I find the most difficult generally to get started on is something where I have to do a lot of reading beforehand, like looking for sources and just because it's just boring to me. It needs to be done sometimes, but that's always a bit more of a barrier of entry, just because there's so much dry stuff to sift through, and it kind of gives me PTSD flashbacks to my studies where I was just sit there like going through reading the same damn page for the fourth time because I realized that I read through it and I retained nothing. Okay, restart, read it again, nothing, restart. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I get you. I don't think I started reading books for enjoyment until I was in my 30s. Yeah. Otherwise, it was always homework or a chore, or just lack of a better thing to do. Is more or less the how that often worked out for me.
I've got a question for you here. Like, what kind of flaw annoys you the most in a sword? That's kind of a deal breaker.
Swords that hurt you.
Yeah, that's fair.
Them. If I think of swords that like I just don't enjoy, they're the ones that I can't pick up and smile. Like so, Viking swords are an example like that. Like I could absolutely just have one on the wall, and there are exceptions to that, like exceptionally beautiful swords that will do that. The Albion Sovereign is one that like I don't particularly like how it handles or feels, but I love how it looks. It reminds me of. It's not the same as the one in the Sword in the Stone, but like I don't know, it just gives me nostalgia, happy vibes because it's what young Matt thought swords looked like. And so even though I don't like handling it, I just love the way it looks, so I keep it. But I haven't found like a Viking sword that tickles my fancy the same way. If I had the Sutton Hoo sword from Patrick Barta, I'm pretty sure that would just occupy a space on my wall, and I wouldn't care if it gave me herpes every time I held it. I would still probably keep that. However, those tend to be the most irritating things as like a collector, and it doesn't have to be like a historic or like that could be how they're engineered. I just don't vibe with them. The real irritation though, if I think of the worst sword I ever reviewed, I asked you, the one for me is a sword from a company called Alayubi, and it's an Indonesian maker. And I got a sword from friend of the channel, and it was a cable steel Damascus-y sword that was sold as functional, but like very fantasy inspired. And the handle like was made of material that exploded on use. It had like antler or some sort of, what might be acceptable for a knife, but not holding up pieces of swords. The pommel fell off and was also pointy so that you couldn't do anything. It was neither offensive to the wheel to like anyone that you might want to strike with it, but it did hurt your hand if you held it. So bad. The cross guard had little points that if you choked up on the grip or went in for a thrust, stabbed you in the hands. Like just like the sword was trying to unalive you itself. And then so the grip is one. That one though, I probably was one of the very few like overwhelmingly negative reviews that I made because the tang of the sword was insufficiently small and also cut in a spot that left roughly 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch of solid tang left sold on a functional sword. So like the handle exploded on use. It tried to stab me, and then the sword was made in a way that very well could have, hurt another person if they were just using it and swinging it around. That was a failure point that could have fatigued and turned the sword into a helicopter of death. So the manufacturer of like if it's meant to be functional, then it should be manufactured in a way that is commensurate with that. And then deal breakers for me of like I don't want this anymore. It hurts me to hold.
That sounds like they made a fantasy sword IRL, because that's a lot of the problems that you have with so many fantasy designs. It's like, why are there spikes pointing at the hand? Huh?
Yeah. Otherwise, like I'm generally pretty tolerant, and if the swords are like the Conan the Barbarian sword is like a great example. I have the Albion version of that sword, and it is an awful sword. Like, it's awful in ways that you maybe don't often hear about. You know, it's 8 pounds or something like that. So yes, and you know, for 8 pounds, it's not 7 feet long, which is bad. But the grip is so short, you really can't get two hands on it. The pommel's too big to hold on to, so you really you're often restrained to a two-handed, very uncomfortable grip, because one hand just really not happening with 8 pounds. But the handle's also round, so it wants to turn in your hand. And then if you hit anything with it, the nodes are in the handle in a spot that wants to shake it out of your hand. So like the sword wants to come out of your hand, yet it's from Conan the Barbarian, so it's also awesome. You know, like there's the balance. Like, I haven't sold that sword. I've had it for years, and I still like it because there's something special about it. But it doesn't hurt you exactly for holding it, but it doesn't reward you for moving it or using it either. So there's always exceptions, I guess I would say. I could see how there's a sword where the handle's made of like used needles that want to stab you. But if there's some reason for it, if there was something cool about it that I could get on board with, then all right. But just any old vendor that's like, this is my take on a fantasy and fuck you, doesn't do it for me. What about you?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I haven't encountered that as much, like not catastrophic failures just like that. But yeah, that would be pretty good. The other thing I would add is horrible blade geometry, where you have this flat bar, and it's like a massive secondary bevel and a super steep short grind that just nobody will ever cut anything with. And if you want to fix it, it's gonna take hours upon hours of just grinding and grinding, because you have to reshape the whole damn thing. It's like, it's not as obvious as delivering a sword without a handle, but it might as well be, because it's unfinished. Like, they didn't do the job. Like, you have to put an actual proper bevel on it, like proper grind, and just.
Are there times where that grind would be preferred? Like, is there any customer that might like that?
Maybe, but then they might as well just deliver the blank. Just to not even have an edge. Don't even pretend that it's sharp.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. Like, really terrible edge geometry, if it's sold as sharp and has an axe grind on it, and it takes hours to fix. I don't know, because I do know that sometimes edges, if they're particularly obtuse, right, then they stand up better. So how much does it need to cut is often a question. And if you're whacking armored targets, if you're striking lumber in your backyard or something, if that's the use, and it's really easy to brush off and say, like, who does that? The people that do that. If you are training for armored combat and you want to whack a post in your backyard with a sword because you want to practice with a sword, you need a sword that's really durable, and an obtuse edge is probably going to hold up better to that, I would guess.
Yeah, but even then you can do it better, because axe grind is actually better, because then you have like a lenticular grind. Like, it's a relatively thick edge, like it's a sturdy edge, but at least there's like a gradual smooth transition there, as opposed to where just that shoulder in and of itself is going to ruin any attempt to do anything with. So at that point, you're better off just leaving it completely blunt, essentially. And also, it depends on the type of sword. Like, when I see like a really light sword that just doesn't have the mass to clobber its way through and is not supposed to be used against armor, like if there's like a fairly light side sword or a rapier or something, it needs a proper edge. Otherwise, you just wouldn't do much with it other than thrust.
That I struggle with that general thought in my mind, because there's a lot of uses that I'm not familiar with, and I think you're making a very strong case for, like, yep, that's just a deal breaker. Don't fuck it up. Like, do a better job at your geometry.
Yeah, if it's like a sword that's meant for unarmored dueling, like a rapier or a side sword, and it can't cut through clothing, then you're screwed. It's just, what are you doing?
I don't know. So I have often been educated that there are uses outside of the dumb things I do with swords, or the ones that I'm aware of. But oftentimes there's like some customer for it. There's some reason. There's some justification for it. But a lot of times it's just because it's a kind of a lazy way to do the sharpening, or it requires, you know, learning how to sharpen or doing some process differently, and that costs money, and you know, you're not going to sell anymore because they're sharper. Or maybe you will. I don't know. The business side of swords is like a confusing one. And it always surprises me that, like, all right, when I talk about swords on the internet, the people in this chat are probably interested in swords and sword reviews because they're here listening to two people that do this on a Saturday morning. But the sword market is enormous, right? There's a lot, you know, there's a city in China that's making a lot of swords and shipping them overseas. That I have no idea how many, but I'd have to imagine, if I understand that there are hundreds or potentially thousands of small forges making swords, that thousands of swords ship out of there a year. And there are companies in the United States like Albion, who's behind a year, and Arms and Armor, and all of these people constantly making swords. But like, I know hundreds of people that use them, not millions, but there's so many out there. So the market is just bigger than what I know. It has to be to justify the output of swords that exist in the world. And with that, there's probably a bunch of stuff that I just don't know about the people that buy them and use them. Or it just could be that 90% of people that buy sword are like, a sword would be cool, buy now. And then get it. And that's but they never go on the internet or look for more information about it or talk about it again. It just sits on the wall and good enough until they sell it on Craigslist for $30.
Yeah. In which case you can just get a cheap ball hanger that you like. Sometimes people ask me this kind of thing. What do you recommend? You know, I'm not looking to use it. It's just something nice to have on the wall, and just pick whatever you like. In that case, you have no criteria other than I want it to look nice. I can't tell you what your own taste is. So just pick whatever and put it up on the wall. It doesn't need to do anything. It doesn't need to fulfill any particular needs. It's just, if it looks nice, okay.
I usually recommend, and most of the time I get asked about katana, but there's a Musha or Musashi sword for 50 or $60. And it's not a great sword. Objectively, it's a very bad sword, but it is still, in fact, a sword that does sword things.
Yeah.
And so for that amount of money, at least if katana is your thing, it looks like a sword on your wall, not the fanciest, but you can get the dumb out of your system with the sword. So you can whack a tree, bend the blade, screw it up, and then not be out an enormous amount of money and be like, yep, swords definitely bend, they break, they dull, they chip, they scratch, they do these things that I don't like. And also from there, you'll say this sword is too big, too small. I like this. I would prefer this or that. Hopefully, like if you want to buy another one, then you will go into that next purchase a little bit more informed, but also like not have wasted a bunch of money in doing it. Because I don't know about you, the first sword that I forked over a lot of money on, I was not particularly happy with. It's one of the reasons I started talking about swords on YouTube, and I lost my shirt when I went to go sell it secondhand. So
yeah, they're just different applications, you know, like, and particularly I think that might actually be a particular kind of bias to think about as a sword snob, if you will. Like, if you've tried so many and you have like pretty high standards, you know, after having cut with several $1,000 swords that are just beautifully shaped and you know, handle flawlessly and are super sharp and all of that. It's you have to kind of remind yourself, not everybody is like that. Not everybody needs this masterpiece. You just want something kind of sword like that, you know, works for just messing around with a couple of times, and that's about it.
I find that I might be the worst person to ask that question to. Like I immediately go so in the weeds about every potential factor that could influence a purchase that, like, what sword should I get? Is just like my brain though. Like, how tall are you and what do you like and what's your budget? And like, but there's so many different things that could influence that. it's a tricky question to ask. But for $60, buy this, get the dumb out of your system, and if you don't ever want one again, hang it on your wall. It looks like a sword, and if you don't like it, then you're not out a lot of money.
Yeah.
It seems at least a reasonably compelling.
There's a place for it, no doubt.
Yeah. Do you find that you don't like, having had a lot of fancy things, do you find that you can't enjoy inexpensive things? Does that apply to, when you see a sword that's a couple $100, do you say like, there's a place for this? Like it's flawed and it's not as good as, the other items in my collection, but it's a tenth of the price.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can still appreciate it for the price, for what it is. My reaction might be kind of meh, compared to a lot of the other stuff, but I can still give it points for being affordable and not a disaster, pretty well made and all that. And so, yeah, I can appreciate that. And I suppose there is something to be said about having a beater, something that's not super expensive that you just mess around with sometimes, do stupid things with, and you don't have to worry about it because if it gets damaged, okay, no big deal. And chances are it probably doesn't because they tend to be overbuilt.
Is there any sword that like you became, that demonstrated itself as a really amazing value for the money that made you think it was closer to, like, it was in another league than its price point would suggest?
Yeah. What is that? The Wishlist has this Cobra Steel series. I don't know if they make them anymore, but that's this kind of thing. They tend to be sort of a modern tactical take on historical swords, but yeah, those are, or at least used to be. I haven't looked at them in a while, but they used to be dirt cheap pretty much, but surprising quality for the money. So that's definitely exceptionally high value for what you're paying.
Those are usually like sub $100, sub $50 things.
I think some of them were like $60 or so even. It might have been more because money's worth less now, but
yes.
I feel like I remember them costing like 50 or 60, something like that.
That's been a trick recently, is adjusting to the new value of money.
Yeah.
But like in doing this for so long, there's this catalog of things and prices that are in your head. Now, the last 10 years of that are no longer valid. You have to like strike them from the record or re-look up like what the prices would be for something comparable, because I find that to be a little bit of a struggle as I think about value myself. If I'm saying like this is worth the money, I'm like, but it's $500. I'm like, but 500 is kind of the new 300.
Yeah. So you might be like, oh, this is so expensive, and somebody else tells you like, no, it's not. Don't be such a boomer. Like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? It's a lot of money. No, it's not anymore.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing. There have been some that the Templar sword from Valor Arms that was sent my way. I don't generally like the Type 12 wheel pommel. Like, it's just wouldn't be something that I would go out and actively buy. So I was glad that they sent it to me, because it just wouldn't be something that I would seek out. And it's very, very nice. It's not quite the same thing as an Albion, but if you can imagine like an Albion prototype, it's kind of gives me that vibe. Like, there's a lot of things that are really, really fun to use about it and really quite good. And there are also some minor things that could be tweaked, but considering it's like $400, it's like, wow. I'm very surprised by that, given that it feels really like every now and again, I'm surprised by something that just seems to bat out of its league a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you get surprised anymore? Is there anything in a review recently where you've been like, oh,
rarely
good, bad, or something unique that I didn't expect?
Occasionally, I think, but not so much anymore. It's just like when you've been in the trenches for so long, it's just like, yeah, okay. How about you? Is there anything like that these days where you're like, whoa, this is different?
Yeah, it dawns on me as well that I'm dominating the conversation with a lot of questions, Skall. Feel free and interrupt me and
No,
jump in.
don't
But
worry.
yes.
All good.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by how much I'm still surprised, if that makes sense. There's a company called Shadow Dancer. They used to be called Dragon Sword, and now they're called Shadow Dancer. And it's been in the last year or so that I got examples from them. But I remember when they contacted me and said, "Would you like to review a sword?" And I looked at it, and they were a katana that looked like just about any other thing from Longchuan, China, that, you know, at a glance, at first glance, just kind of looked like anything else. And, you know, you never know until you handle them. There could be something special. And when I got it, I was like, oh, shit. And then, like, I could kind of see some of those details in the photos. I just didn't pick up on them. And so they turned out to be a little more schmancy than I initially expected them to be, a little better put together, you know, addressed a lot of criticisms that I commonly have in swords. And they've surprised me. The Type 12 that I was just mentioning from Balor Arms is another one. I thought I didn't really like swords like that. I thought, you know, they felt a particular way. And then I picked this thing up and I'm like, oh shit, like, that surprises me. And that continues to happen with a lot of different swords. Like I'll think I understand how they feel, and then I'll pick up a different example, and, you know, there's nuances about what makes them good or bad, or what makes me smile about them that I didn't expect. Lance Connect Emporium is another example. I think of that. There's a sword friend, Ian, is a collector, has a large number of messers from Lance Connect Emporium, and sent them my way, and was very patient as I worked through the review process on a number of swords that he sent me. And initially I was really kind of critical about all the little human effects, all the roughness of the look and feel of the sword. But like as I had more and more experience with those swords, it kind of the unfinished or roughness of it became a little bit more endearing. And they also, you know, in terms of I have some that I actually have to go break now, but there's like, they feel like a sword I could go to war with and like have a beer with afterwards, you know, like they have like a personality and character that I didn't spot from the photos, and that I didn't get right away. And I had to spend a lot of time before I really liked them. And now, like, it's one of those swords that I go, you know, into my sword vault and I pick up, and it just kind of makes me smile.
Actually, on second thought, you're totally right. I can't lie. There are things still like that surprise me. I mean, I even made a video about that fairly recently, about the sabers that LK Chen makes. You know, like the 1860 cavalry saber and the 1796 and what? Yeah, right. That handling those actually changed my opinion or general impression of them, because up until that point there wasn't really too much in the way of you know, later period sabers, because it tends to be outside of my realm of interest when we get into like the 18th century and beyond. But yeah, that showed me that there's absolutely really good stuff in there as well. And generally, I wasn't expecting them to deliver such good swords in general at this price point, especially also the rapiers, because there's so many bad rapiers on the market. There's so many that are just not done very well. Like the blade is terrible, and they don't handle right, et cetera, et cetera. And those were way better than I expected. So yeah,
they seem to be doing a lot of things really, really well. LK Chen does. The Balor Arms versions, the ones I'm talking about, were made in collaboration with LK Chen. I think the designs have been made by a few different people, but the messer that they sent, which I think they're going to make a different version of, which I'm hopeful about. Very thin, but held up really. Like, they're durable. They're, you know, thin and move like swords do. They seem to have, you know, some idea of how to make the design that Balor Arms is putting out. I think overall designed well. And some of the Chinese swords, I kind of regret breaking so many of them. But the Magnificent Chujian is another one of those swords that, like, I still have. I pick it up. It makes me smile. It's just a fun, very fun feeling sword.
It is.
What do you do with the stuff you get? Do you get asked for a free sword every day? Do people ask you every single day for a sword?
No, not really.
No? I don't know. What about me?
Do people ask you about that all the time?
Yeah. I get asked every day, will you give me a sword? Or like, can I have the broken stuff? is
Hmm.
sometimes though I guess I will take the broken things, and sometimes neat stuff happens with them. I don't generally, I do give them away, but I don't generally give them away to people that ask. I guess this is the important thing.
Yeah, I would do the same. So whenever I give something away, it's not because someone asked me. The same
Yeah.
way as I would never make someone a moderator who asks for it, because like, you're too power hungry. You don't deserve this. You can't handle the responsibility.
Being a moderator, and what is it like in the chat of YouTube?
Yeah, in the chat or on
Okay.
Discord.
Okay. Yeah, I think the first time I was, I think I made everybody a moderator on my first live stream. That was probably Oscar.
Everyone.
Somebody was like, "You should not do that," and I was like,
No.
"All right, yeah." And then I stopped doing it. So
Did they all
if
ban
you were
each
there
other?
the first day, you're still a mod, but if you're not, then you're.
That's great.
Yeah, as you can see, Skall, I have a slightly more what's the word? Less intelligent take on how to do things on YouTube. Just post under my real name, give people my address, my social security number, make everyone a moderator. It's
Yeah, you just gotta invite people into your house to cut things. And
yeah, that has also happened. That has, yeah, there's been a few strangers from the internet that have come over. Though I see that a little bit as like I don't know, paying it forward. I remember when I don't know if I was on YouTube or not at the time, but I was talking about buying fancy katanas, and I was mentioning that I had spent a bunch of money on this, schmancy sword. And somebody said, for that amount of money, I would buy a Geo token blade or some, specific Nihonto piece. And somebody directed me to a website and said, look here at one of these swords. And I was like, oh, this sword, this website is based out of Minnesota. Like, the guy is here. And so I emailed him and I was like, I'm a stranger from the internet. You're local. Like, could I buy you a cup of coffee? Could I, could you teach me some stuff? And he said, sure, come over. So all of a sudden, stranger on the internet that has like no intention of buying anything gets to go to this collector's, reseller's house of antique swords. And I was like, hey, I don't know anything. I'm dumb. I think I know things, but I probably don't. And he's like, oh, come over here. And so again, stranger from the internet, he goes back, he unlocks his safe, and he's like, come here, big guy. And he, he puts my arms out like he's going to fill me up with firewood, and he starts loading swords on. He's like, don't drop that. That's like $1 million now. And so we go back, and the most expensive swords that I've ever really like gotten to spend a lot of time with was that. I got to hold a sword from the Jitetsu, which is like the disciples of Masamune. So one of like Masamune's direct students made this sword, and I'm looking at it, and he's like, you see this? And I'm like, yes. And he's like, that means that. Just so much going over my head. But I'm a big stranger in this little guy's house. I hope he was armed and just not making a big show of it, because that's a scary thing. And then he unlocks his safe and hands me all of his treasures and proceeds to donate hours of his time trying to help me make sense of them. And it was, but just a delightful, wonderful experience. And so
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so that, like, people have been very generous to me with their time. People have been very generous to me with like trust. And so I try to pay it forward, but it can be weird as a YouTube person as well, because I got family and stuff here. It'd be weird if things went poorly. There are also some etiquette things that people learn, and like it's not always fun to like explain how to handle swords when people think they know it, but
right, that can make you very unpopular.
Yeah, like, don't lick it.
Because some people, Dunning-Kruger effect and all that, some people know or think they know a lot, but then they really don't. They make horrible mistakes, and you're like, can I point out something? Then they're offended.
Yeah, but it's all right. Handling swords is incidentally kind of a funny thing. There are a lot of people that think they know, and a lot of people that just don't think about it at all. There was a show that I went to for the dojo that I'm in. There was like a Japanese festival, and a whole bunch of different like arts and stuff that like celebrate it were there. And the dojo that I was at was doing demonstrations. And so we had this rack of the swords that we use for the cutting demonstrations and stuff. And there were a few people that just felt like completely okay with going up and like taking them out and looking at them and touching them and playing with them. And they were like, oh, is that not okay? And I I didn't want to say no, but I was like, it's kind of like touching another man's penis. It's not a no, but it's definitely ask first. You definitely want to make sure it's okay. Get consent beforehand. Not that it'll be it's not a no, just you want to ask.
I feel like there's a little bit of a difference there still.
Yeah, there's still a difference, but you definitely the point was ask before you do it. That's
yeah. That makes sense. I wouldn't immediately tear someone's head off who touches my sword, but other parts,
they'd be like, what are you doing? I would be very confused. Like, this is not. This definitely feels like you should have gotten permission. Yeah. People don't know. Don't touch the blade. Don't lick it.
Yeah, don't put your fingerprints all over it.
Yeah, and it
don't go like, is this sharp?
Yeah, I haven't had that. I haven't had anyone like directly cut themselves on things, looking to see if it's sharp. But I have had folks that have touched stuff without me looking. So there was the worst example I can think of is when my collection was a lot smaller. My mother-in-law had like a guest or something over, and they found out I had swords and were really interested, and she felt it was okay to like show them the stuff, and they took something out and like looked at it and was like, oh, really neat, but didn't tell me like it got touched. And so a big rusty fingerprint when I went to go like clean them a couple months later was on the sword, and it was had to be repolished, and that polishing cost a few $1,000s. And so that thumbprint was a very expensive thing. And when I found it, I said some unpleasant things.
I would imagine. Yeah, that's awful.
Yep.
Yeah. So far, really, I've only caught or handled swords with other people who know at least the basics. Like cutting seminar where everybody's just drilled. Be aware where your blade is. Keep it up. Don't walk around with the point forward and run into people and this and that. And they already knew how to handle stuff, and so that's generally. But if you're dealing with an unknown quantity, like some person that you're not sure, do they know how to handle them safely? And you got to explain it to them first. And
there's just differences in like even observation. So if you're
Yeah.
looking at like the medieval European stuff in museums, usually you'll wear like a white glove or something like that. And there's a way to kind of pick them up and set them down so that you don't fatigue the tips and whatnot. But you can, still move them a little bit, handle them a little bit, but people don't often wear masks while they're talking about them. They don't avoid speaking moistly over them. They're already rusted, and that doesn't seem to. It's like they're doing something to abate rust, but they also aren't like super sensitive to minor scratches or like spittle, so to speak. But in the Japanese realm of things, like you might not wear white gloves, but you would handle it with a cloth, and you wouldn't talk over the sword because those little specks will mar that kind of perfect polish. You also wouldn't set it on a table it has like a little pillow that it sets on, so that it doesn't come in contact with the table, because then even picking it up might scratch it. So like even among educated people that do it a lot, there's differences. Though I would imagine that a European museum would probably not take issue with the way a Japanese sword collector would handle their swords, but a Japanese sword collector would probably very likely take issue with the way a lot of curators handle their stuff.
Oh yeah. I would expect so, yeah. It's a different level.
Well, anyways, we are coming up on time, Skall. It dawns on me that it's been 2 hours, and that's the amount of time I said I would pester you with questions. As we close up, is there anything at all that you want to talk about? Things you wish people knew, something on your mind, whatever it happens to be.
And what I wish people knew is just kind of the usual. Try not to be a dick on the internet, because there's way too much jumping to conclusions and being uncharitable. Where I wish people would give others benefit of the doubt more, but that's a very general thing. This doesn't pertain to anything in particular we talked about. I don't think I have too much else to add. We've talked about quite a lot of sword nerdery, as they say.
We have
Nobody
gotten
says
up to some sword nerdery here. Well, stick around for just a second in the room after I close the stream, but we'll wrap it up here at 2 hours. I appreciate everyone for keeping the chat lively. I apologize as well for neglecting you all. I do know there were some questions and fun things that were going on, and hopefully I can suck less at chat in the future, or I can, in retrospect, Skall, if we ever get a chance to do this again, I will ask people for their questions ahead of time, because being better at chat is asking a fart not to smell. So let's be honest about it. Anyway, thanks everyone for sticking around on the stream. Cheers and thanks for watching. And thank you, Skall.
Thanks for having me, Matt.